Hello, my name is Dan Tempest, and I will today be presenting to you about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems and everything that goes along with that. Definitely part of the peripheral nervous system. So, to get into the peripheral nervous system will transmit information to and from the central nervous system, which is the CNS, and peripheral nervous system would be the PNS. And this is going to play an important role in regulating the movement and internal environment of a vertebrate. So humans would obviously fall under that category. You can see in this picture, we have the central nervous system, which would be your brain and spinal cord, and then your peripheral nervous system would be essentially the brains or the nerves that come off of those two things. So both the brain and spinal cord. And in the vertebrate, peripheral nervous system is going to consist of right and left pairs of cranial and spinal nerves, which we'll get into next. So here we have cranial nerves, which will arise from the brain and mostly are going to innervate organs of the head and the upper body. Whereas the spinal nerves are going to arise then from the spinal cord and extend to parts of the body below the head, because that's where the spinal cord would be. This is all about the nervous system wants to be as efficient as possible. So where the way we can do that is have nerves that go to the central nervous system as quickly as possible. So the location is key. The faster we can get that information, the better, and the faster that we can respond to stimuli that might be affecting bodily function, the better. So that's why we have these spinal and cranial nerves. All right, so the peripheral nervous system is then divided into two functional components. Those are going to be the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. And you can see the autonomic nervous system is further divided, which we'll get into later. So just to talk briefly about the somatic versus the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is going to carry signals to and from skeletal muscles, mainly in response to external stimuli, although it's not limited to that. This is going to be under voluntary control or conscious control, so we can move them on purpose, in other words. But much of skeletal muscle activity is actually controlled by reflexes, which could be mediated by the spinal cord or likely the brainstem as well. But usually we think of under voluntary control because we can move them on purpose if we so choose to. Opposite of that, then, the autonomic nervous system. This is going to regulate the internal environment of the body by controlling whether that be smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, and then the organs of a lot of your systems, like your digestive system, your cardiovascular system, the excretory system, and the endocrine system. All would be regulated under this autonomic nervous system. And these two are going to work together to maintain homeostasis within the body. For instance, skeletal muscles would be shivered, for instance, if your body gets too cold. So that's kind of how one of the ways that they could interact with each other. And that autonomic nervous system is definitely involuntary. We can't move this on purpose. This is the body's natural controls, and it is divided into the sympathetic, the parasympathetic, and the enteric divisions, which will be our focus here. So now getting into the difference between those three. So we have the sympathetic division, and this is really going to focus on arousal, energy generation. The fight or flight response will correlate with that as well, versus the parasympathetic. And activation of this division is generally going to promote calming, maybe a return to self-maintenance functioning, things like resting and digesting. And these two are also, and I'll get into this on the next slide a little bit too, we'll show this, they will be antagonistic. So the sympathetic might arouse something where the parasympathetic might do the opposite, in other words. Then we have the enteric division. This is going to consist of complex networks of neurons in the digestive tract, also determining or controlling the pancreas and the gallbladder. All right, so with parasympathetic versus sympathetic and the functionings of those two, and as I mentioned on the previous slide, we have antagonistic effects here. So I'm going to go through several examples of this here and kind of show also where they come from. So if you look here on the left, we have the parasympathetic, and on the right, the sympathetic division. The action on the target organism is what is listed. So we have the parasympathetic constricting the pupil of the eye. And as I mentioned, antagonistic to that, the sympathetic division would then dilate the pupil of the eye. So completely opposite again. Parasympathetic is going to stimulate salivary gland secretions, whereas the sympathetic will inhibit salivary gland secretion. The parasympathetic division will constrict the bronchi in the lungs, whereas the sympathetic will relax those bronchi in the lungs. The parasympathetic will slow your heart rate, whereas the sympathetic will accelerate your heart rate. The parasympathetic will stimulate activity of the muscle and the intestines, and the sympathetic will inhibit the activity of the stomach and the intestines. The parasympathetic division will stimulate activity of the pancreas, and opposite again, the sympathetic division will inhibit the activity of the pancreas. The parasympathetic division will stimulate the gallbladder, whereas the sympathetic division will stimulate glucose release from the liver and therefore inhibit maybe the gallbladder. The parasympathetic division will promote emptying of your bladder, making you go to the bathroom, whereas the sympathetic division will inhibit the emptying of your gallbladder, of the bladder, And then the last one, the parasympathetic division will promote erection of genitalia, whereas the sympathetic division will promote ejaculation and vaginal contractions. All right, so again, very antagonistic. They work against each other. And then the last part of that autonomic nervous system is the enteric division, and this is mostly going to be about your digestion. So again, this is going to consist of the digestive tract and the neurons that control that, the pancreas and the neurons that control that, and then your gallbladder and the neurons that control that. These networks of neurons will control the secretions from these organs, as well as the activity of the smooth muscles that will produce peristalsis, which moves food through your digestive tract, whether that be your esophagus or through your intestines as well. And this is also going to be regulated by the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and we went through that a little bit on that previous slide. Some of those antagonistic functions of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic divisions controlled a lot of that digestive tract and whether secretions were happening, etc., things like that. But smooth muscle activity, especially of your intestines, are controlled by this enteric division. And as I wanted to reiterate, the somatic and autonomic nervous systems are often cooperating in their maintenance of homeostasis. Okay, so this my references for this presentation, I used my AP Biology textbook extensively, especially for the images. I watched a video to kind of refresh my understanding of the autonomic system that was brought to you by Crash Course on YouTube. And then I also used our class textbook, specifically the peripheral nervous system chapter in that. And then that textbook is titled Human Physiology from Cells to Systems. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.